Cradle, The Rise of the Chosen, Chapter 3. His new boss, Gafunti, wanted him at the law house the day after commencement. Taikuma knew it wasn't of Gafunti's own accord. He was directed by Kudos. The only reason he knew was because his mom's friend, Decidre, was Gafunti's niece, and the word slipped out. The way the village was, business didn't really start to roll until after lunch, so Taikuma made it to the clay-crafted law house with time to spare. Gafunti was sitting on his cushion and chewing buunti leaves, tobacco. Taikuma nodded as he walked into the open hut and sat on the dirt floor. "You think you're smart?" Gafunti asked. "I don't think I'm dumb," the young man answered. Gafunti spit the juice on the floor and was silent for a moment and then laughed. "Humble, though he sees. We'll see, though. Being Olhinta means you earn your spot, your respect. I don't pussyfoot, so I'll throw you in and see if you swim." "So it's quite obvious she stole it," said the general merchant. Taikuma was struck dumb. He didn't know how to mediate the situation, and he got lost in the details because his nerves were distracting him. He shook his head slightly. "Say that again." "She stole the quilt. It's obvious, and it was not a cheap one either," the merchant said, getting angrier. What makes it obvious?" Taikuma asked. "Who is this kid?" Gafunti shook his head and gestured with an outstretched arm for Taikuma to proceed. "Kid. She was the only one at the stand the whole morning. It couldn't be anyone else." Taikuma looked over at the young woman, and he saw it in her face. She was a good person, but the reasonable conclusion seemed to be she indeed stole the quilt. Taikuma turned to the woman and cleared his throat. "My lady, you say you didn't steal the quilt." She nodded. "Then where did that quilt come from? Who walks around with a quilt, especially when you're in a store that is known to sell quilts?" I brought it from my house. I just wanted to see." "Shut up, liar." "Let her finish," Taikuma said firmly. She was about to break down in tears, and her frown was shivering. "No crying, sweet lady, no crying," Taikuma said. She gathered herself. "I brought the quilt from my house. This is mine. I wanted to see if my work was as good as the professional quilts." "You made that quilt?" Taikuma asked, impressed. "Let me see." She stood up and walked over and handed him the quilt. Taikuma looked it over closely for several moments and then shot Gafunti a look. "Sir," Taikuma said to the merchant, "look right here at the quilt." Taikuma showed the section of the quilt to the man, and the merchant suddenly took on an expression of shame. "May the gods forgive me. May the gods forgive me." He bowed and walked out of the law house with his head hung low. What Taikuma showed him was the swinni. It was a small lock of hair sewn into the fabric of the work, and the hair color matched the woman's exactly. There was no need to look too closely because she was Ipu, a type of rare person with fiery red hair and yellow skin. The woman smiled at Taikuma and left, and Gafunti spat tobacco on the floor and grunted. Along the western path back to the capital, Taikuma was feeling relieved that he didn't totally whiff off on his new job. His heart provoked him to give warranty to Kudos. Thanks. There was something itching in the back of his mind, though. It was distracting him from enjoying the smell of the fresh fallen rain that stopped a couple hours ago. He approached the part of the path that bordered the forest, and he felt his Ichirayama as a particular point of location in his mind's awareness. It was a weird sensation that would normally be called Mubuya, needle hole through the sky. He looked down at the path and saw 2 gold surleys and 1 copper opki. Surleys were $5 pieces and opkis were cents. He thought his fortune was leaning toward the fortunate, but he reminded himself of Mubya and hesitated before he picked up the money. He looked around and then walked on, leaving the money on the ground. Once he'd walked 50 meters along the path without looking back, he ducked behind a boulder and stared into the forest for several minutes. Sure enough, he saw Acetra emerge from behind a tree. She was trying to work her magic on him, and it made him even more sure of the fact that he was bonded to another woman he'd yet to meet. He reached the Adafiri as the clouds gathered and darkened the capital. It was far from ominous though. In Takuma's opinion, it was rather beautiful. Inside, there were only a couple hallways and a handful of rooms, and it would be easy to find Kudos Vibina. No, that is not what the hell I said. Takuma wasn't sure whose voice he was hearing. The woman saw Volkumen, a lot of them. Volkumen were a mystery in Takuma's culture. No one knew if they were from the gods or basically space travelers, and they hadn't been sighted for ages. They were humanoid, but no one ever got the chance to get a good look at them. Where did she see them? A different voice asked. I can't tell you. You sure as hell better. Uriptu. Suddenly it felt like he was pinched in his right temple and something caused him to look to his right, where oddly there was a large open window. He didn't know what to do, and then he was pinched even more severely. He jumped outside through the window and hid beneath it for a while. Iriptu was a fairly holy place, a sanctuary at the base of Mount Jiusit. It was claimed that someday the portal in the mountain will bring Ruitu to this world, the truest light. I'm going to have you do some paperwork today. I got behind on Kiru syntax. Gods know after the Chikwi festivals, there was a lot of Kurio. You don't have a desk anywhere, Takuma responded, looking around the cluttered room. Use your damn lap like I... Suddenly there was an approaching wall of sound coming from the street. Takuma was annoyed because he just wanted to start the paperwork and get it done. It was going to be so boring. He didn't care much to see what the commotion was because he'd had enough surprises this past few days. But the sound came right to the law house's door. What a gift this man is. What holiness has gave us we treasure. Behold the fine men of Ituriyama. They were chanting. And they kept chanting this repeatedly after Takuma stood in the doorway and they all got on their knees and continued to chant. And the children laid their favorite toys at his feet and smiled sweetly at him. And later women dropped silver coins at his feet and smiled lovingly at him. This was too much for the young man, but he stood there appreciatively to honor them. And finally the men offered their daggers and arrows, an ancient sign of following another man. It was too much for Takuma. He didn't know what this was all about, but after they left, he worked diligently in an effort to humble himself. No one was home, which was odd. His mother and father worked from home and had little reason to go out in the evenings, but he admitted it was normal for them to be gone on occasion. Blessed be the free time. He stepped in his room and saw a shadow of a man. Hello, Takuma. Kudos? Yes. Look, I won't tell anybody about it. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm here for Nika Liuma, to be of your service. That's okay, but... No, I have to. I am Dolu, a sect, family of the preservation of royalty, particularly royalty of Pohira. What happened? Why are people doing this today? Takuma asked at a loss. Tiexu saw you at Utiri. Tiexu is a regarded shaman, and Utiri is a vision of glory. Tiexu was known in other villages because he had Olityu, which was almost like the Ituriyama, but a speck of blue in the upper center of his iris, and it was even more rare because Olityu was bright green and larger than the normal pebbles or specks. That's all well and good, but I'm just a young man, that's all. I'm going to honor my vow. Honor me by leaving. Takuma came back from work on the night before Fiui's Sabbath, and his mom gave him a look, and he knew what he'd find in his room. He saw Kudos standing stoically in his room. Please, Vunti. After Fiui's service, his family gathered in the kitchen, and just to be sure, he checked his room and was entirely annoyed. Vunti. He was starting to feel like he was mean-hearted. The next morning, Kudos Vibina was standing in front of the house and looked straight into the young man's eyes. We are joined, Takuma said, though he still didn't know if he could trust the man, Dolu or not.